From the panel, from the government, Laura Trott. She was appointed Pensions Minister by Rishi Sunak last autumn. She's been MP for Sevenoaks, which is just up the road, since 2019. Before that, she was an advisor to the former Prime Minister David Cameron. From Labour, Peter Kyle is Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. He's been MP for Hove and Portslade since 2015, following several years working in the charity sector. Another of the 2019 intake is Munira Wilson of the Liberal Democrats. After training as a tax consultant and then a decade as a lobbyist, she became MP for Twickenham 3 years ago. She speaks for her party on education. Janet Street Porter is a journalist, broadcaster, walker, baby boomer and loose woman, according to her Twitter bio. That's the TV programme, obviously. Having been editor of The Independent on Sunday, she's now also a columnist for Mail Online and the I newspaper. And Theo Paphitis is a retail entrepreneur and former TV dragon. After moving from Cyprus to the UK as a child, he left school to be a tea boy at an insurance broker. He's since gone on to own Ryman, Robert Dias and Boo Avenue. After being a dragon for 7 years, he left the den in 2012, save a few guest appearances since. Good evening from Gravesend in Kent. Welcome to our panellists, welcome to our audience here. Great to see you. You are, as always, a reflection of the broad electoral map of the country we're in. Obviously, we're in England. Great to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home. As always, we're on social media. We're also on BBC Sounds after the programme. So, let's kick off with our first question, which is from Surinder Bindra.
What is the right level of immigration for the country?
Right, so today, which is why you're asking this question, Surinder, there is a record high of net migration, 606,000. Laura, what's the right level?
I think everyone accepts that the level of migration that was announced today, which is around 600,000, is too high. I want to say three things about it, though. The first is that about 160,000 of that number are actually migrants from Ukraine and from Hong Kong. And that was something which I think was supported by everyone in this room, everyone at home. The second thing is we've got a plan to get these numbers down. A plan that will mean we have the people to fill the jobs, but also we're investing in skills in the UK. We're making sure that where people are taking advantage of the system, like we've seen with international students, their dependents, we're cutting down on that. And the Prime Minister's, one of his top priorities for this year is to stop the small boats. And the last thing I'd say is that you can't trust Labour on this one, because they went into the last election saying that they wanted freedom of movement. As recently as 2020, Keir Starmer said he wanted to defend free movement. So migration is too high at the moment. We've got a plan to get it down.
Peter?
Well, just to finish up there, when the Labour Party left office in 2010, we were in the EU with free movement, and the net immigration figure was 250,000. It is now 600,000, and we've had 3 general elections where they have gone in with manifestos to reduce it.
It was calculated differently back then, of course.
No, actually, the net migration, like for like, it was 250,000. That was after the Kosovo War. We were taking in people who needed to seek refuge and workers. It was 250,000. Now, I just hope that after 13 years of government, at some point, they will take responsibility for something. That is what I really hope for. Now, overall figures at the moment, they are too high. They shouldn't be this high, and we think it's needlessly high. That's the problem. Just look at where the forces are driving the current figures. Yes, we have people who need to come here and seek refuge. That's completely right. There are also people who come here to study. Our universities need it. Our students here who are born and bred here, they benefit from it as well. But there's another category there as well, and let's just talk about that. Because we have 7.23 million people on the waiting list for treatment in the NHS. We have 2.5 million people who are economically inactive at the moment and unable to work. We have 800,000 young people who are not in education, training or work. That is millions of people that this government have left on the sidelines of our economy. And for every person that is waiting for treatment and is in pain and cannot work, then their employers are looking elsewhere. So until we get the basics of running our country right, getting public services to get people healthy where they need to be healthy, we will never be able to get migration figures down to a level whereby British people are doing the jobs domestically, locally, and those people we do bring in are people that come in because they have specific skills that we need in any moment in time.
Dear.
Wow. Two politicians speak. Laura, welcome to Question Time. I've done it a few times, but, you know, I've never been disappointed when a politician comes on, gets asked a question, and the first thing they do, rather than answer a question, is attack the opposition. It was a question that needed an answer. And I just want to simplify it. I mean, we talk about immigration, and it's like it's one pot, and everything's immigration. But you can break it down to several pots. You can break it down to the illegal immigration, which government hasn't dealt with. So that definitely hasn't been dealt with. So that's part that very few people would fail to agree with, that we've got to clamp down on that and make sure that we deal with illegal immigration. The second point is we still have a massive skill set issue. If we want to have a competitive commercial environment that the UK can be competitive in the rest of the world, we need the correct skill set. And it's not always possible to train your own, especially in the time that you may need to. A doctor can take up to 7 years, a nurse 4 years. So you do need to bring in that skill set. Then there's industry, commerce, where if we don't keep up with the rest of the world, we will fall behind. And it's not, we can't always have the exact skill sets that we need. So business and the rest of the United Kingdom does need to bring in skill set. So that's an immigration that I think we all agree is the right immigration as well for us.
And do you think it's at the right level?
Well,
so of the figures, about 25%, that's about 235,000, that's for work visas. Does that feel about right?
Well, it does feel right, but there's a third element. And that third element is where the United Kingdom has had a relationship with another country. For instance, I'm a first-generation immigrant from Cyprus, which was an English colony. And when the United Kingdom gave its independence, because my parents both worked, and my grandparents worked for the British in the British bases. When the British left, they gave them a passport and said, we're leaving and you can follow, because it wasn't always the right thing to do for people to stay behind. So we have responsibilities, and we've seen that now with Hong Kong, and we've also seen it in a humanitarian way, brilliantly, with Ukraine, where the British people have stepped up and supported proper humanitarian requirements. So you can't just put it into one. You've got to break it down.
But when you see that figure of 606,000, do you think that feels about right? Does it feel too high?
Well, it doesn't. You can't tell, because we know that a big slug of it has come from Hong Kong and Ukraine.
All right.
So if you then look at what's left, then it doesn't feel horrendous.
OK. Man there in the glasses.
Yeah, in answer to what's just been said, the biggest problem in my experience is that the reluctance of industry to train British workers, and the solution for too long has been to go abroad or to go outside of this country and bring in cheap labour. The cheap labour, when it arrives, takes over the jobs of the established people, and it takes away, I can tell you it did in my industry, and it's still doing it.
Which is your industry?
I work on the river as a tug captain out on the Thames, and it takes years to learn the job. It takes years to learn to be an engineer. We don't train any engineers now. We don't train any skippers. We go to another country where they'll work for longer and for cheaper. So that part of it is dying. Then the people that used to teach people like me, they haven't got a job either. Industry in general, not just my industry, see the solution to most problems, lorry drivers. Where I was based in Denton, the lorry drivers would pull up at night, the Eastern Europeans, and pull out their cooking utensils, cook their meals, go and do what they had to do the other side of their lorry, and then go and sleep in their cab, because they work cheaper than what British lorry drivers do, who want proper facilities. The answer to most solutions, bricklayers, they're cheaper from abroad, electricians, tug captains, they're all cheaper from abroad because they work for less. And one company went up and set up against the other, and you all have to join in. And last point, 50 years ago, my uncle moved to Nottingham to set up his own electrical business. Everyone then paid 5% of their business into a training scheme, until someone learned that if I don't pay into that, I can charge 5% less.
OK. Thank you for your point. Yes, there's a hand at the back. Yeah, yes.
Yes, there's a major problem with the business model of universities in that they rely on the very high fees that overseas students bring in. So that's why those 160,000 odd students do come here, and they need to come here to keep the universities going.
And do you think that's too many then?
Well, I don't know. It's just that the universities really do depend on that income.
OK, the woman in front.
I think it's because there's no training for youngsters.
Oh, so the same point as the gentleman made there.
Yeah, but I had a gas engineer come to my house and he said years ago he'd take a young lad with him who would be training up. He said now that's all gone out the window.
OK. So, Janet, the question is, what's the right level of immigration for the country?
Well, I kind of agree with Theo that there is a skill shortage, but you have to go back to the education system and ask, are we providing the right education to equip young people to want to go into professions like my dad was an electrician when he left school and then he trained and became an engineer. And I've built 2 houses and I know that skilled workers are like gold dust and I encouraged 2 of my friends' kids to be apprentices, one to be a plumber and one to be an electrician, and they both ended up. And they needed a hell of a lot of persuading because they thought that they weren't good enough, they didn't have the confidence to do the exams, they didn't want the year or 2 on low wages and so on. I think there's got to be a lot of recalibrating how we educate secondary school kids. I mean, telling everyone they can go to university is not a great idea.
But is it also a question of which jobs are attractive? Because if you remember at the beginning of near the beginning of the pandemic, there were vegetables rotting in the fields. We hadn't got people to come and pick them, and there was a Pick for Britain campaign by the government, and only 8% of the 70,000 jobs were taken up by Brits. 8%.
I agree, and in this part of Kent, the labour shortage was really felt. But people did not want to go and pick fruit between here and Margate.
Which would suggest we do need people coming in.
Well, we do need people who want to do those jobs. Okay. Whether you agree with the wages they're paid or not is another matter. But look at the National Health Service. Peter was saying, he was trying to make a point about the National Health Service, but it relies entirely at the moment on immigrant labour. And unless we change the way we educate nurses and educate and produce doctors and make those trainings shorter, more intensive and more available to a wider range of people...
Okay. Munira, I'm just getting around this, but I know you want to come in. So, Munira, what's the right level of immigration in the country? I was looking at Lib Dem's policy statements. I couldn't quite work out where you are on this. Do you want 606,000? Are you happy with that? Do you want it to be lower, ideally?
Well,
higher?
I think the right level of immigration needs to be dictated largely by our economic needs, but also by our responsibility in our world. So, as others have pointed out already, the particularly high numbers this year are because over a quarter of those have come from Ukraine and Hong Kong, and the British people opened their hearts and their homes to welcome them in. I've helped so many constituents who've taken in Ukrainian refugees and are still hosting those refugees, and there was great support for that. So
there will always be world events like that are outside your control. But work visas, for example, are something that the government entirely can control. And as far as the Lib Dems are concerned, what is a comfortable number for the Lib Dems in terms of work visas?
It's impossible to put a number on it. So there were 178...
Why is it impossible?
Because of the reasons, actually, that Theo laid out. There are so many skill shortages right across the economy. And for what Janet said, you look at our health and care service, I mean, it would collapse without immigrant labour. So in the numbers today, about 178,000 of those visas related to health and care.
But do you have no sense of where you're even aiming for?
Because it'll depend year to year what the skill shortages are.
But in terms of how many people you think Brits should be doing the jobs and how big you think the skill shortage is, literally just no idea.
No, it's not that you don't have any idea. It's dependent on both world events and what the economy needs. And I just wanted to pick up the point about universities, because they are one of our greatest exports. I'm really proud. As a proud Brit, we have some of the best universities in the world that attract the best and the brightest. And they contribute, last year they contributed over £40 billion to our economy, and the cost of that they incurred by bringing their family members with them was about £4 billion. So net, they contributed £36 billion to our economy, and our other students benefit so much from them. So for the steps that have been taken this week to row back on students bringing in their family members, their children or their partners, I think is really damaging, not just to our economy, but also to our world standing. And I was speaking to a university vice-chancellor yesterday, and he said to me, although my university is not too badly impacted by this, he said, the message has gone out that you're not welcome here, and I'm already being told by the people I speak to around the world in a fiercely competitive environment that they're going for the US, Canada, Australia, and other English-speaking countries. And just one final point. I mean, you'd say you're taking action on small boats. The problem is you've got 173,000 asylum backlog today. This is 5 times what it was in 2017. It is off the charts, and that's because the Home Office is broken. And Suella Braverman's response to all of these issues is policy by press release. She doesn't focus on any solutions that might actually work.
Well, look, the question is, which neither of you two have answered, you haven't answered it either, Munira, is what is the right level of immigration? That's what Surinder's asking. I haven't had a straight answer from any of the politicians on the panel, so let's have another go. What is it?
I mean, I've said very clearly lower.
No, you didn't. Well, lower. OK, so let's look at the numbers. There's 606,000. You've already said you don't want people coming on boats. That's 45,000. You're trying to stop dependents coming for mature students. That's about 85,000
That's
dependents.
160, yes. With it, well, about, let's say 100. About 100.
OK, so 100,000. That's a little bit less. OK. Yeah. So of the work visas, for example, who would you not want coming here?
I think this is, and the point that the gentleman
Would you want to answer
there,
that question?
No, I will, I promise, I will.
Would you want to answer it now?
So I'm going to talk about a story which illustrates our different approach.
Well, so just before we get that story, because I'm going to ask you both.
So, for example, on HGV drivers, so that's what I was going to say.
Can you answer that question and then do the HGV drivers? So who, on the work visas, for example, we know half of those went to health and social care workers. Who would you not want to come if you want to get the numbers down, which the Conservatives have said repeatedly since 2010?
Absolutely, and it's really important that for skilled professions, like, for example, HGV drivers, we take up that we're training as many people as possible. And that is what we have shown that we are going to do.
But so the numbers that are coming now, in order to get the numbers down on work visas, because I understand you can't control what happens in Ukraine, Hong Kong, things like that. On work visas, who would you want not to come?
It's really important that we have more training for people within the UK.
But of those coming now, who can you see would because you've been in government for 13 years now, who can you see that you would like not to come in order to get the numbers down?
So I just gave an example. So, for example...
Lorry drivers.
Yeah, exactly. So when...
That's yes.
Yeah,
but lorry drivers, a lot of British lorry drivers have been trained already, and that is a success story.
Yes,
but the numbers are still at 606,000. So who else?
Well, I mean, we can go through that. I would like lots of jobs to be done by British people.
He's got his head in his hands, so we're not getting an answer.
But where it's possible...
OK, all right, nothing specific. Let me ask the same question to you. Who would you like not to be coming in order to get these numbers down, which Labour has also said it would like to see, on the work visas front, for example?
I think it is unnecessary if our training programme, if our universities and our medical schools were focused in the right way, we wouldn't need so many people coming in here working in our NHS.
But that's going to take years. So in the short to medium term, who would you like?
I'll tell you what we'll do.
Or would you like the work visas to stay the same? I'm just trying to... Because we've heard both parties say we want the numbers to come down. I'm just trying to get a sense of how you would practically do that.
Right now, if your profession is on the skills shortage list, an employer can go abroad and offer 20% less wages to a foreign worker than a domestic worker. So that should be scrapped now. Now, that would disincentivise going abroad in the first place, and it would incentivise investing in the workforce and the local workforce and the potential workforce locally. We do that now, today. That's that example. Secondly...
And how long do you think that would take?
We could do it today. We could do it
today,
and it would start making an impact.
Part of that. And so that goes against exactly what you just said.
No, and then we move to health and social care workers. Now, one of those skills shortages is actually nurses. Nurses have been on the shortage workers list, skills list, for 13 years. Every year this government has been in power. Now, what they've failed to do is lift the number of nurses that are being trained. They have artificially suppressed it. A letter went out to every university last year saying, do not increase the numbers of nurses training. What we would do is cancel the non-dom tax status, and we would double the amount of training places for doctors and nurses. So we have a short-term programme we could do now. We can refocus the apprenticeship levy, medium-term impact, long-term impact, get those training places wherever we can find them so that we can have the skills that are there for our NHS where they're needed. And we wouldn't need the kind of immigration. Now, Laura can say pick holes in it, but under the last 13 years, you have failed every single promise you have made the public. Why don't you take accept responsibility for the failure your government has delivered and the broken promises you have done?
Can I tell you? A story which I think really illustrates the difference between our two parties on this, which I think is really, really important, right? A couple of years ago, we had a shortage of HGV drivers, right? The first thing that Keir Starmer said, immediately, the lever that he pulled, was we need 100,000 visas for HGV drivers. That was the first thing he said, right? What did we do? We increased training for people here. We made sure that people in this country got those jobs. That is our approach to immigration. That's what we've tried to do, and that's why you can trust us.
And as you, hang on. And as you know, the boss of one of those companies, because I suspect you've read the same article I have, Laura, said we've solved the problem, as you say, but we've had to pay through the nose for it, and wages have increased 20 to 30%. So there's pros and cons to that. Yeah, you had your head in your hands. You had your hands for a while now.
And we've trained people in this country. That's what I think everybody here wants.
Yeah, we believe you. Right, so let's go back to the question from the lady over there, which talked about international students. International students account directly for about £20 billion of exports and about 37 billion if you count indirect as well. That is bigger than the aerospace industry in the United Kingdom and the oil industry.
And because you're Vice-Chancellor, right?
And I've got to declare, thank you very much, that I am a Chancellor, not Vice-Chancellor. Chancellor of Solent University, so I've been transparent here. So it's a huge export income for the United Kingdom, and it allows us to run the universities that we've got and make sure that we can subsidise our own training and education here. Secondly, 15% of students, 15% of mature students bring dependents. And dependents can only be spouses and children, not their grannies, their aunties and nephews or the next door neighbour, which has been pushed around by various parties. Thirdly, the new changes proposed by the Home Office will only affect 10% of those 15%. So actually, the changes are negligible and just there to capture headlines, because I'm afraid we politicised immigration again to basically distract from everything else that's going on. You can't politicise immigration, because what happens is we damage the country for the sake of our own parties, and that can't be right.
Right, let me take a few more points forward before I move on. Yes, a woman there in the glass.
I'm a retired midwife now, but I went into midwifery training when I was 31 years old because I had the opportunity to go in directly and have a bursary. And there are hundreds of women out there, and men, that would do nursing or do midwifery if they had the option of going in and getting a decent wage or a decent money so that they can train. These midwives, when they're student nurses, student midwives, student whatever, they are supernumerary on the wards, but they're not. They work hard on those wards because they have no option, because the staffing is so poor. When I was I've worked many a shift on a delivery suite where I was the only British-born person, but there are hundreds and hundreds of women out there that would like to do it. The places for midwifery training and nursing training go so quickly, and there's never enough. I'm sure if there's any other nurses in this audience, they'd agree with me. When you did away with the bursary, you did away with a whole generation of people that could be nurses or midwives or doctors or whatever.
OK, thank you. Osman.
You both talk about increasing the amount of training numbers for NHS workers. How are you going to track these workers when you don't even offer them a pay fair award? And the people who will come into these... And the people who will come into these jobs will hemorrhage to countries like Australia, Canada, the USA, where we're being paid properly.
Right, we hear you. And yes, this woman here in the glasses.
So we're hearing lots about bringing in skilled workers such as nurses and HGV drivers, and that's fantastic. But actually there's those businesses and industries which are not considered skilled workers. So even here in Kent, we know, which is high in hospitality and tourism, there's a labour shortage. And, you know, I don't know for certain, but possibly those spouses and those dependents might be those people who'd like to take up those jobs. So it seems to me that we need extra immigration to help fill those positions so the vegetables aren't rotting on the fields and so that we can keep our cafeterias and hotels open.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move on, actually, if you'll forgive me, simply because there's a lot of other questions that you've raised, and I've spent 25 minutes on this one, so if I don't move on, I'm not going to get through. So thank you for your point. I just want to tell you where we are next week as well. We are in Leicester, where the campaigner and cook Jack Munro is on with the former Conservative Cabinet Minister and Governor of Hong Kong, Chris Patten. The following week, we are in Kings Lynn in Norfolk. So that's Leicester and then Kings Lynn in Norfolk. If you want to apply and be part of the audience, go to the Question Time website. Here's the address, and just follow the instructions there. OK, we could talk about immigration all evening. I totally understand that. But a lot of you asked about this next subject, so let's hear about it. Harry Joseph Kander.
Is the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, offering enough of an alternative to the Conservatives to gain a majority at the next election?
Who are you going to go to first?
Well, I thought I might come to you, Peter. What do you think?
Harry, I think he is. And the reason is that we have set out a credible alternative to the government. If you just take the cost of living challenge that we had last summer, we saw this coming from outer space. The government did very, very little, too late. We came out last August with a package that would have kept everybody's bills right where they were then, and it would have saved every single household £500. If the government had started investing into household insulation when we called for it, that would be 1 million homes that could have had lower bills this year. So we're always coming out with radical, big, bold alternatives to the government, but they are also sensible, deliverable, and they respect taxpayers up and down the country. So, yes, you know, we are putting forward an alternative. It is being rewarded. In the elections that we had just a couple of weeks ago, we increased the number of councillors by 500. The Conservatives lost 1,000. We're doing well in the polls, but we know we've got a lot more to do. And believe me, every single one of us is working our absolute socks off to make sure we have the policies, the alternative, and we are the credible government of waiting so we can hit the ground running, whilst we have a government that seems to be doing everything it possibly can do to prepare itself for opposition.
Harry, you asked this question. What do you think of that answer?
I would say that, just from judging young people around me, I would say that they're not as excited, for example, a Keir Starmer government as he have been for previous leaders of the Labour Party.
And why do you think that is?
I don't think he's offered enough of an alternative to the current government to really differentiate between the two, like Labour have been able to do in the past. So I feel like even though the Conservatives have been pretty terrible for 13 years, it's quite embarrassing how Labour still may not be able to form a majority at the next election. It's quite concerning, and I don't feel like they're really given a good opposition right now. So I'm still undecided personally, where I shouldn't be, given the current state of the country as it is at the moment.
But Harry, there is nothing more exciting than being in a Labour Party that can actually has the prospect of forming a government. I mean, it might well be that the leaders...
You're not convincing him.
It might well be the
leaders
in the past that you might have been excited about didn't win the elections, and we need to learn the lessons of defeat, as well as learn the lessons of where we've won in the past. Keir Starmer has learnt those lessons of those defeats. He's put them into action now.
So be unexciting and not clear, and then you might win.
Look, I mean, I'm listening very carefully to Harry and others. If we still have people we have to convince and excite about the prospect of a Labour government, we're setting about trying to do so, and I'm doing so with humility. But I think the fact that we want to repurpose the economy, we want to reinvest in skills, education, we want to make sure that we're going to have the biggest house-building programme that we've seen for several generations, so that people like you can aspire to be house owners again in a decent job in a country that's respected around the world, rebuilding the opportunities that have been wrecked by this government. These are things that are really exciting. Keir Starmer holds that promise. He can do it. But he can do the thing that very few Labour leaders have done before, and that's beat the Tories, win an election, and get cracking delivering fairness again.
Was that a party political...
Let's bring in the rest of the panel.
Can I just say one thing?
Go on.
Right. On the night that Tony Blair was elected in 1997, I was there at Festival Hall, and the atmosphere was electric, because Tony Blair had what Keir Starmer lacks, totally lacks. Tony Blair, whether we like him or not, how we feel about him now is another matter, but in 1997, he exuded charisma. He was hot. I mean, young people were captivated by him. He had a huge number of female MPs came into Parliament, the largest number ever elected at one time, and we felt we were on the beginning of a new era. Now, I'm sure that Keir Starmer is a decent, reliable bloke, but is that the kind of bloke you want to get into bed with in the next 10 years? I mean,
well, that is a whole other show, Janet.
No, but being serious, seriously, I think I think Keir Starmer comes across as a decent person, but I still don't understand his policies.
So you think
hang on. Peter, you've got to let the rest of the panel in.
Don't you think our country deserves a decent
I know you want to answer every single bit, but I'm going to let the rest of the panel speak too.
To flog your party to death tonight, but you've got to connect with the guy that asked the question, and you haven't, because young people, sadly, at the moment, feel that British politics isn't for them. And there's a huge gap. I go back to 1997, where there was some hope that young people felt that when they voted, it would change their lives. And we've seen now there's a huge gap in the reality and the myth that you lot put out.
OK, let's hear a little bit from our audience. Yes, the man there.
I think no matter how charismatic or uncharismatic Keir Starmer is, I think they're still going to get more votes than the Tories, because I think everyone's still absolutely disgusted with the Tories for how Boris was partying during lockdown. No matter who the government is in the Tories, no one can get past that.
OK.
He was charismatic.
The man there in the suit and tie, yes.
OK. Thank you very much. It's not news any longer that the living standard has gone up, as well as mortgage repayment has gone up. This is due to the fact...
Do you mean living standards have gone down?
The living standard has gone up.
Living standards gone up, OK.
Yeah, and mortgage repayment has gone up as well. This is simply because of the interest rate has gone up to 4.25%. Now, some time ago, the government introduced, or rather abolished, the stamp duty up to £425,000.
Can I just ask, is this relevant to the question about Labour offering an alternative?
My question is, for first-time buyers, what is Labour's plan to help first-time buyers as regard, them having deposits for their first property?
OK, I will let you answer when I've gotten around the panel. Munira.
Well, I think it's for the British electorate to decide if Labour has done enough to convince the public that they deserve a majority. But what I can tell you from knocking on doors week in, week out, is the British public, even in Conservative heartlands, are thoroughly fed up with the Conservatives and the chaos they have inflicted on this country, going from crisis to crisis. They crashed our economy. One of my neighbours, a couple, 2 teachers in state schools paying £400 more per month on their mortgage as a result of that disastrous Truss budget. The cost of living is through the roof. Living standards are at their worst in years. And our NHS is on the floor. So, no, people are saying no thank you to the Conservative Party. And as we saw at the recent local elections, the Liberal Democrats are... they're turning to the Liberal Democrats in their droves in many parts of the country. We exceeded all expectations, and we did exceptionally well. And so we will be working hard to win as many seats as we can at the next election.
Unlikely, with the best will in the world to be able to form a majority government, the Lib Dems, I think it's fair to say. Coalition word comes up often. You ruled out a coalition with the Conservatives. You said it was... But as far as Labour is concerned,
well,
can you rule that out equally strongly or rule it in?
What I will tell you is I and my colleagues are laser-like focused on winning.
Do you think we're going to get an answer?
No, we're going to get an answer.
So why can't we get it? Munira, it's a serious question.
No, I tell you why you can't get it.
Because you ruled it out with the Conservatives, so why can you not be equally
I don't think the British public would forgive us for propping up this morally bankrupt government. But what I will tell you...
So is there therefore a possibility
the reason why I don't think about coalitions, even for...
Hang on a minute. You're the party of coalition.
Sorry. The reason why I won't countenance it, because I think I think it's actually taking votes for granted. And one of the things that I hear time and again is that the British public feel that the Conservatives have taken them for granted. I am not complacent. I don't take a single vote or a single seat for granted. And to start thinking in the realms of, oh, the Lib Dems might be the kingmakers after the next general election, I think is hubristic in the extreme. So that's why I am focused on campaigning to win as many Liberal Democrats
that's
in the
your
next
only
election.
reason for existing.
Yeah.
That's your only reason for existing.
Are you suggesting I shouldn't exist, Theo?
No, to actually win votes and get into government. And if you don't believe you can do that, you've got no reason to exist.
What? Liberal Democrats, MPs like me, every day we're making an impact in our community and we are there to hold the government to account. I am not focused on what happens the day after polling.
But if they asked you, what would you say?
What's that?
If Labour needed your support to form a government...
We'll come to you in a minute, Peter. We'll ask you in a minute.
I'm sorry.
Hello.
Go on. Can I just ask, if Labour asked you, what would you say? Yes or no?
It's not my decision to make, Janet.
No, but your party, you must have a policy about it.
No,
don't tell me you haven't thought of the possibility.
No, because we are focused on winning seats.
OK, so let's hang on. Let's dissect this for a minute. What is puzzling, Munir? We've heard you loud and clear. What is puzzling? I don't know about you, but on the one hand, for both parties, on the one hand, we definitely won't go into bed with the Conservatives. But when it comes to would you actually do a deal with each other, that's a hypothetical question. It's no less hypothetical than would you do a deal with the Conservatives. But for some reason, it's one that neither of you feel you can answer. Would you answer it?
We are 15 points ahead. We have just had a fantastic set of local elections. We have every reason to believe that if we continue in the way we are, connecting to voters in places where we lost, I mean, not far from here in Medway, these are places you only win when you are about to form a government and you are winning and you are on the pathway to government, and we are winning in those areas. So we're not sitting around planning for a coalition.
No, can you rule it out then?
No, we are planning to win outright and have a programme for government for it.
Of course, no, I understand that, of course.
We will not need a coalition. There's only one party that has needed a coalition, and it's the Tory party.
No, Peter, I hear you. But nonetheless,
not one coalition,
you've
but
ruled
two
out a coalition with one party. Well, therefore, you can easily
We're not going to need it.
So you're ruling it out with the Lib Dems, then?
Fiona, there is no evidence.
If you don't need it, can you rule it out?
You're asking me a question for which there is no evidence. We are 15 points ahead. We've had fantastic local elections.
What do you think?
We are looking
to win
outright.
No.
Why would you answer a question that is completely not relevant to the reality that we're in?
Peter, can I
We're not going to need it.
So no coalition with the Lib Dems? That's what you just said, because you're not going to need it. So
we're not going to need it. I've said we're not going to need a coalition with the Lib Dems. We are fighting for every vote. The programme for government is ready to go.
Peter, you just said you're 15 points ahead in the polls. There was an Ipsos poll only this April that showed that Rishi Sunak is more popular than your leader. So, actually, between now and the next election, which possibly is about 18 months, roughly, anything could actually happen. So the fact that you're 15 points ahead, but your leader is still less popular than a sitting Prime Minister that's with a government that's been around for the last 12 years must be worrying.
You point to one poll from 2 months ago for evidence on one criteria. Now, currently, the latest poll of this week, Keir Starmer is more popular than Rishi Sunak. But the key thing, the key thing is that when we went into the 2015 election, where I was elected for the first time in the fantastic constituency of Hove and Portslade in the city of Brighton, we were behind. Ed Miliband was more popular than his opponent, David Cameron, but we were behind on some of the key other metrics about departmental leads. Right now, the Labour Party is ahead on the economy, law and order, immigration, NHS, and we are neck and neck on things that we have never, ever been in front of since we were last heading towards government in 1997. So, Theo, it's not just one criteria. The Labour Party is now trusted on the economy more than the Tories. It's trusted on immigration.
Let's speak to them, because
we're getting the fundamentals right. That's why I have confidence in what I'm saying, why I have confidence if we carry on as we are, we will not need a coalition. We'll be ready to roll out a great radical programme of government on our own.
So, Laura, the question is the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, offering enough of an alternative to the Conservatives to gain a majority at the next election?
Look, I totally get last year we made a lot of mistakes, right, and I'm really, really sorry for that. But who you've got in charge now is Rishi Sunak. He is a good man. He is a
He was Chancellor during that time. It's not as if he wasn't there.
I know, but he is...
He was number 2 in the government when all these mistakes that you're referring to were happening.
And during that time, he produced furlough.
Was he just going like that?
No, he produced furlough for the country, which supported the jobs of many people in this room. Right? He's got a track record of delivering for this country, and he's got 5 priorities that he's going to do this year. He's going to halve inflation. He's going to grow the economy. He's going to reduce the debt. He's going to cut those waiting lists, which are way too long, and he's going to stop the boats. And you compare that, right, with Keir Starmer. Like, every pledge he's made, he's abandoned.
So what do you say to the young man over there?
He thought he was going to nationalise all these industries. He's not going to do that anymore. He was going to scrap tuition fees. Not doing that anymore either. He was going to be the great defender of free movement. He's not doing that anymore either. I've got no idea what Keir Starmer stands for.
So what do you say to that the man over there who said, after what happened with the Conservatives, I could never vote Conservative?
I'm really sorry, is what I would say to you. I really am sorry. But we've got a really good, decent man in charge who's doing the right thing for the country, who is delivering for the country. And I back him 100% to be a brilliant Prime Minister, and he will go on doing that. Let's take another question from Claire Chambers.
Is it right that a family with 2 adults and 2 children should still have to rely on a food bank to get by?
So, Claire, are you referring to your own family situation?
Mine and others that I do know, yeah.
So do you mind me asking, are you both working, for example?
Yeah, we are, yeah.
And what do you do, you and your husband?
I'm a cleaner. My husband works in the transport industry.
And yet, despite that, you have to rely on food banks?
Every now and again, not constantly, yeah.
And how do you feel about that?
It shouldn't be that way. It seems like those that are unemployed get the free dental care, get the free this, get the free that. Yet there's no incentive for those that do work and try. What do we get?
And is there anything specifically you'd want the government to be doing?
Just a little bit more giving to those that do actually work. Instead of, oh, you've earned that, we'll take that. While you see those that don't get given everything on a plate. There's that right.
OK. Let's... Laura, obviously I'm going to come to you on that. Let's just go around the panel to begin with. Janet.
I think what needs to happen is the government needs to look at the rising costs of things like food basics that have soared over the last year. And it's almost as if all the supermarkets are in league together, because there's the cost of just buying essentials must have really, really impacted on people. I mean, when you've got stuff like washing powder has gone up from £4.50 to £9 if you're using the environmentally friendly salt that we're supposed to be using, I really don't know how families like yours do cope at all. What can the government do? I think they need to rein in the supermarkets. They need to look at the cost of transport and make it more affordable. I can't, you know, it's things like that, really.
Theo?
Well...
I mean, what do you think when you hear... I mean, there's 2 working adults...
Yeah.
...and they're having, from time to time, to have to go to food banks.
I don't think anybody on this panel would argue that's wrong. I don't think anybody would argue that's wrong. But we don't seem to be able to deal with it. Now, we're talking about inflation going down today, and down to 8.3%, whatever it was. But actually, food inflation is still running at just under 20%. Yeah. Now, that... when it slows down, the prices aren't going to come down. That's my concern, is it will just go up slower. That's all that's going to happen. So we know there's a serious issue with food inflation, and that seems to be just brushed under the carpet, and that now needs to be addressed, because we've got to the stage where people can do without lots of things. Mothers and fathers and parents make sacrifices for their children every single day to go without, so their children can get food in their bellies. But the reality now, food's becoming an actual issue in being able to acquire the food in the first place.
And what do you think should be done about it? I mean, at least 2 of the big supermarkets didn't make a profit last year. So it's not as if they're making a lot of money off the back of it.
I think it's not fair to blame the supermarkets, because there's a whole supply chain that runs into the supermarkets. And if you talk about fuel costs make a massive difference to food prices. So they've got to be factored in. The whole supply chain of getting food onto your plate involves so many inflationary affected services. And the problem we've got, we haven't been able... Now, credit where it's due. I think the government stepped in absolutely right on fuel for households to try and protect everybody through the winter. But it didn't deal with the food aspect of it.
All right. OK, well, let's put it to the government. So, Laura, when you hear what Claire has to say there, and thank you, Claire, for sharing that with all of us. We're grateful. How can you help her? She feels that she's being pretty much abandoned.
Yeah, I know it's really, really tough at the moment. We are trying to do all that we can to help. So Theo talked about the energy help that we put through that I'm sure you've been receiving. So we put the windfall tax on the energy companies, which paid half your energy bill over Christmas, but we know it's still really, really high. I totally get that. You've also got the cost of living payments. I hope that you're on that. Maybe you can answer or not afterwards, which, you know, you've got the £300 so far this year. You've got another £600 coming. Hopefully that will help a bit as well.
But it's still, she's still having to go to food banks.
I understand that. I'm just saying, we are giving support, and I hope that is going to help. But the long-term solution to this also is trying to get inflation down. And that is what we are absolutely working on. It's starting to come down a bit, but Theo's totally right. Food inflation is still way too high. So we're working to try and improve that. But that is at the root cause of these issues.
Claire, what do you make of that response?
I agree in a way, but there's a little loophole with the universal credit. When you get paid for weekly, you get paid 13 times in the year. If you happen to get paid twice in 1 month, you effectively earn too much for universal credit and go without, even though you haven't actually had extra that month.
So that's something you would like to see
sorted out? There's that little bit that needs to be changed.
Do you know what? Look, I'm the Minister for Pensions, but I'm in the Department of Work and Pensions, and I'll take that away and have a look at that, Claire, because that's a really important thing that you've just told me.
Yeah.
Is that the first time you've heard about that?
Well, no, it's
that's a well-known
it's a double. In terms of the double payment, I think that's something we need to look at.
Right, because I'm sure that's not the first time that's been brought to the attention of the government.
Of course, no.
Munira.
So, Claire, first of all, I'm sorry that you're having to go to food banks. There was a survey that the Liberal Democrats did earlier this week, and we discovered that 1 in 6 parents had gone without a meal or more last year in order to be able to feed their children. As we've heard, food inflation is over 19% at the moment. Price of cheese up 40%. It's incredible. One of the things that the Liberal Democrats have called for is a plan to try and tackle food prices. One of the things we called for, actually, we're pleased that the government's already started, which is to get the Competition and Markets Authority has started looking into how all the different players in the food chain are operating, and therefore hopefully not making unwarranted profits when, say, wheat prices are coming down but flour prices are not. We've also called for the energy support that was given to businesses that are part of the food supply chain to not be taken away. For example, farms are really energy intensive, and all that energy support that was being given to businesses has been taken away. So as we've heard, the energy costs are also helping drive up food prices, but also particularly for families with children. A passion of mine, and something that I've been campaigning on as the Liberal Democrats education spokesperson, is to make sure that every family that happens to be on universal credit, that their children is entitled to a free school meal. At the moment, unless you're on £7,400 or less, you can't get a free school meal. And there are 800,000 children living in poverty today who are going to school hungry, don't get a hot meal, they can't learn, they can't thrive, and it's also bad for their educational outcomes and ultimately for our economy. In this day and age, no child should be going hungry. So I'm begging the government to change the rules on free school meals and introduce those. I'm sorry that also Labour haven't supported that plan when we've pushed it in Parliament, but it is something that I think would really help families so that your children are at least getting fed at school.
Peter.
There are so many people in Claire's position, and the thing that is so striking, though, is it's not just a cost of living phenomena, it's not just a post-COVID phenomena. I didn't know what a food bank was until about 8, 9, 10 years ago. There wasn't a single food bank in the community that I live in until 10 years ago. So this is a problem that's been emerging for a long time. There has been now 12 years, year on year, when real terms wages have fallen for people in the public sector and people on lower income. 12 years of real-term decline in what your money can buy every single month. Now, we're not going to be able to change this fundamentally, Claire, for you until we get those basics right. The two biggest costs that most households have is the cost of housing and it's the cost of bills. These are now taking up nearly 60 to 70% of people's income. So when it comes to housing, we've got to get cracking with house building, lowering the house cost so that we can make sure that more good quality housing is available for people at a cost they can afford. That's for home ownership and more rights for the increasing number of people who are in private rented accommodation. Of course, the government have dropped all of their targets on this. We need to reinstate those targets and make sure that they're delivered on. On the bills, until we get the essentials of our energy supply market and other utility bills right, then we're not going to get anywhere. So just down the road here, the gas storage facility closed. We're not investing nearly enough in the transition to renewables. If we had started insulating homes when we called for it, 1 million homes would be insulated now. We now need to get to, in the next decade, 10 million homes to be insulated so that we're doing things that will drive down the costs that households have so that you'll have more money in the pocket. And then finally, we've got to get growth into the economy. If the economy over the last 13 years had grown at the same speed as it had the previous 13 years, because we've had two governments with the same amount of time in office now, then if they had the same growth from that government in this government, then we would have had 45 billion extra pounds to spend just from the growth alone. We need that kind of growth so that we can make sure it's distributed to those who need it the most, because I know, Claire, that when you are hungry and you are worried about putting food in your mouth and on the table in the coming weeks, then you're not focused on the things you really should be doing, and that is making a better life for you and your family and the community that you live in. We've got to get back so that we can have some hope back in our communities, hope back in our lives that actually things can get better, and believe me, they can.
Claire, we wish you all the best, and thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you. Let's take one more question quickly from Chris Webb. Chris Webb, where are you?
Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, wants to extend the ultra-low emission zone to the outer London boroughs. How can this be democratic when motorists who have to travel in, they have no say in the matter?
Right, so let me just, for those of you who don't know, so the ultra-low emission zone at the moment is within the North and South Circuit. It's going to be extended to pretty much the M25. Gravesend is just outside, about 20 miles outside, so if you're travelling into London, you'll have to pay £12.50 if you've got a petrol car older than 2005 and a diesel car older than 2015. There are a few exceptions, but that's basically it. Theo?
I just think it's been dealt with incredibly badly in an arbitrary way, which, now, we all want cleaner air. There's no question about that. We all want cleaner air. But the RSC have already said that the figures that the Mayor had put forward as his target figures for clean air in areas where ULEZ has been has failed by over 20%. So it hasn't actually had the effect that he'd hoped for.
Well, pollution in central London has reduced by 46%, I think, compared to what it would have been without ULEZ.
But
so I'm not sure what you mean.
The target he set for the ULEZ changes was missed by 20%. The effect
but pollution
of ULEZ
has come down.
It's come down, but not to the effect that it would make.
But not as much as he wanted.
As he wanted, it would make as much difference. And I don't think people have been consulted properly, given the time to change their cars, or the incentives to change their cars. So why is it admirable that we all want cleaner air? Now, there's an argument that says it all has to be done in an organised fashion, and I just think he's a botched job of it.
OK. Janet?
Well, it kind of goes hand in hand with his other policy, which was low traffic neighbourhoods, where there are whole parts of London where they block streets off, put in flower beds and so on, forcing the traffic to go around these areas. And the result has been that central London now has the worst traffic, and that traffic has been shunted out of what is generally middle-class areas onto high streets or lower-income streets where cars sit bumper to bumper.
But it has got cleaner air than it did, and there are people who die from asthma and pollution-related conditions.
Air, But I also agree that this isn't a very democratic policy, that it should have been put to a vote.
All right, let me just hear from the young woman here.
I would like to comment that it does feel like you're being penalised for wanting to go to work. My father's a shift worker, so he'd be charged to go in the night and then come back in the morning, so twice a day sometimes. And it's unaffordable. I think the ordinary citizen is already asked to sacrifice so much from the lady that gave her own anecdote. So I think it definitely does feel like an added tax on people who can't afford it. So.
We'll have to be quite brief because we're very short of time now. Manira.
Well, as an Outer London MP, my constituency of Twickenham is going to be coming into the ULEZ for the first time. And like Theo, whilst I and the Liberal Democrats support the goal of clean air and tackling climate change and pollution, I think the timing and the speed at which the ULEZ expansion is being rolled out frankly, is reckless in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The last time the ULEZ was expanded out to the South Circular, there was about 3 years for people to be able to change their cars and adapt. No, it's,
I know, so it's just we've not got much time. Have to let people in.
The London Assembly proposed, and the Mayor threw it out because it was supported by both the Greens and the Conservatives, to double the amount of money that's being given to people who need to scrap their cars, improve public transport. And importantly, the government has put quite a lot of money into scrappage schemes in other parts of the country, like Bristol and Manchester. And so, as you say, with key workers coming in, doing shift work, who can't afford to live in my constituency, who need to drive in, they should also be being given help, like Londoners are being given to scrap their cars.
This is something Labour supports, I think.
It is. The two groups of... well, this is... Sadiq is a Labour mayor, and of course... the two groups of people who are most affected by air pollution are young people and older people living into later life. And it has very profound impacts on health. We have to take action.
Peter's no one's arguing with that.
Nobody's arguing.
Nobody's arguing with that. You don't listen to the question.
Well, you didn't quite let me finish the sentence, which is, so therefore, it is clearly divisive. We have to move forward, but we have to move forward in a way that does take people with us, and I accept that some people are finding this really difficult. Now, already, in the zone already, I believe it's between 80 and 90% of all the vehicles that are already there meet the current standards. I mean, the challenge is people coming into the zones from outside, which is what affects areas like yours. And I'm sorry, but, you know, we spent a lot of time, Sadiq spent a lot of time making sure that vehicles in the area were converted before going to these targets.
We've got about 20 seconds left. I'm so sorry, Peter.
I'll give you a short answer. It's an absolute outrage, right? Absolute outrage.
And you're not swayed by the health concerns?
No, it does not approve air quality in Outer London. It penalises pensioners going to the doctors, makes them pay £12.50. It penalises people going to work. You're quite right. And also, it's got to be stopped. And the Conservatives are trying to stop it.
Right. OK. I'm sure lots of you would have liked to have come in on that. I'm so sorry we ran out of time, so I wasn't able to bring you in. That's it for this week. Remember, we're available as a podcast on BBC Sounds shortly after the programme. Then we're in Leicester next week, Norfolk the week after. Come and be part of the programme from Question Time this week in Gravesend. Bye-bye.
I don't really have much to whinge about today. Pretty mad one. At least you didn't say housing. Oh, that would get me going, build houses. Fuck the Tories anyway. The only thing I would say is that people who are like undecided, I just think, what planet do you fucking live on? You're undecided about the Tories. Yeah, is Keir Starmer the most charismatic fella I've ever seen in my life? No, he isn't. But then have you seen in the British public vote for it anyway? Just saying. It's not like they need fucking charisma. Fuck's sake. Just get the fucking Tories out. That's all I fucking cared about. Another 5 years of these twats we want about country fucking left. Just saying. Everyone else will be getting a fucking dig and invading fucking France and getting fucking asylum in France. Fuck's sake. Get the Tories out, vote Labour. That's all my fucking messages. Now we'll see you on Sunday for some fucking Laura Koonsberg.